Hello everyone, Vice here. We are going to start our modding tutorial series for Vintage Story. It's going to be based on 1.18. If the series gets extended, we will probably cover convergence to 1.19, 1.20, whatever the future versions of Vintage Story are going to be. Before we get started, it's important to note that there are essentially three types of mods for Vintage Story. You have your assets mod, which is going to use JSON mixed with your shapes and textures to create items, blocks, entities. It's pretty powerful by itself. There is the second kind of mod that is going to be a DLL mod, or basically it's a coded mod only. So instead of, on the flip side, instead of using assets, you're going to be creating specific methods and whatnot to accomplish what you want. This modding series is going to be based on the third type, and it's, in my opinion, the type that, well, if you're going to do something intricate, it's the type of mod that you should be aiming for. It's going to be a compiled mod. So a compiled mod is going to be the best of both worlds. We'll be able to combine the JSON files and the textures, the shapes and everything, and then pair them with the class files so we can do some very intricate things. It's a lot easier to set up than a lot of people may think, and that's what we're going to be doing in this first episode. We're going to be setting up the modding environment, getting everything that we need to get going. Now, I don't know how people have their PCs set up. I don't know what software they have, what version of Windows, if they do any hacky kind of things with registry or anything. I'm going to cover some of the issues that I've seen, but if you run into any kind of problems, errors come up, honestly, just Google search this stuff. There's a lot of information out there. Google knows all. So rely on our overlords to solve your problem. That being said, to continue, we are going to be setting up the modding environment. We are going to be doing a brief rundown on a pretty nifty tool that is optional, but you should use it. dnSpy is what it's called. It's basically your encyclopedia to looking up game code. And then we're going to finish with actually creating the space, making the folders, a brief rundown on the solution when we pull it up in Visual Studio Community. And we will also create the two class files that we're going to need to actually get this to be registered as a full ModSystem mod. So without further ado, let's dive right on into it. All right, in order to get started setting things up, we're going to have to download and install a couple of things, and we will run down them right now. All of these links are going to be in the description box down below. So first thing is going to be your .NET framework, 4.6.1 to be specific. This is a little outdated, but this is what the game runs on. You want to make sure you get the developer pack, because this, we're going to be creating mods. We're not just going to be running pre-existing programs. So make sure you download the developers pack for .NET Framework 4.6.1 and install it. You should be good. Next part, it's going to be Visual Studio Community. If you watch me live stream, you know I exclusively use Visual Studio Community. There's also Visual Studio Code, which should not be confused with this. Code, I've tried it before. It's probably great for those who know how to use it. I prefer Community. This whole modding series is going to be through Visual Studio Community. So if you comment in the section, oh, I don't know how to do this, I'm using code, I'm not going to be able to help you. So download it. Enjoy. All right, another thing to note is as soon as you download and install the Visual Studio Community software, you are going to have to, you'll come out to this workloads. And in the workloads, you will need to check this box here. This is the .NET integration that allows you to write your class files in C#. This is a must-have. Download it, check the box, accept, let it run. When it's done, you don't have to do this again. You're all set. The next part go ahead and pick up the VS Mod template. You can get it right from the GitHub. As of recording, the current version is 1.5.7. As you can see here, it doesn't really update that often. Down here, we have February 7th of 2022 as the last update. But make sure you download this, open it up. We will be going over exactly what you do with this. But if you look at the getting started, this is pretty much what we're going to go over in the steps. So stay tuned. All right, the next thing to get is the VS Model Creator. I use this for all of my models for all my mods. Doesn't matter if it's an entity, an item, a block, animations on a block entity. This is what I use. It's really solid. It does have a couple of little weird nuances that you kind of learn to live with. For those of you who like use Blender, there is a way to get your OBJ files to work as well for your models. I don't know how to do that. I would love to learn, but I don't really know Blender or Maya or anything too well, so it's kind of one of those, well, I haven't had time to dig into the program, hence I haven't really looked into using those kind of files for my models. But I use it for everything. It's wonderful, fantastic. Download it. It does require Java, as you can see here, and there is a nifty link to get Java without having to log into Oracle, which is a bonus. But make sure you get this because we will be using it. Sorry in advance, everyone. Paint.net has a very white screen, but this is the next thing I suggest you get. So you need some kind of image editor. If you use Photoshop, wonderful, whatever you want to use, it's fine. This is personally what I use. I've used this ever since my start of Minecraft, not even modding. This was before when I was just making textures and making texture packs. I would highly, highly recommend this. It's free. Come down here to the free download link. It's wonderful. There are extra tools if you need them. I personally don't need any of the extra tools because with hue and saturation and being able to inject colors different ways, and the way that I make my images is by layering, I kind of don't need anything extra. Everything is in just the base .NET package. So definitely download it. You see here that nifty little thing. It runs on .NET 7. As you can see, it's included as part of the app. So you don't have to worry about, oh my god, I just got 4.6.1, now I got to get 7. Don't worry about it. Yeah, just download it and it installs what it needs. Okay, now we're on to optional things. These are optional, but you know, it's as optional as a steering wheel in a car, right? Like you kind of need them as well. It's just going to make your life so much easier. First thing is going to be getting GitHub. I can't tell you how many times people have come to me and they're like, oh yeah, I'm working on this, but my computer died. Bad things happen, but definitely GitHub Desktop. This is what I use. I use it for a couple of things, right? If my computer blows up tomorrow, I will lose no more than 1 day of work. I also have a laptop. I can upload any changes that I'm making from the desktop to GitHub. I can pull all those changes down on my laptop. I have all my updated code. I'm not, you know, juggling things back and forth, trying to use USB sticks. If all of my machines die and I have to wait a month to get another computer, my code is safe. Not only that, I use it as a changelog. As I update GitHub, I look through my code and I see, oh yeah, I changed this, I changed that. So anytime you see on any of my modding sites, right, you will see that I have detailed exactly what I changed. And really, it was just looking at my history and doing a copy and paste. Highly suggest it. It's free. It's pretty easy to use, especially if you just stick with the desktop link, which is right here. Save yourself some time. Get GitHub. This is a very, very powerful tool. It's dnSpy. So dnSpy allows you to peer into game files, right, and see how the game does things. You know, you ever watch those tutorials and it's like these people are coming out with like the most complex, intricate things, and you think like, oh my god, how do they know how to do that? You know, do these people eat, breathe, and live code? Well, they probably do spend a lot of time poking around the code, but they also know the right tool to be able to see whatever it is they want pretty quickly. This is that tool. I will be going over how to use this dnSpy with a couple examples. So definitely download it, get it set up. I keep mine right on my desktop in a special folder. My model creator and my dnSpy, my VS model creator and my dnSpy, those are on my desktop in their own separate folders. I use them all the time when I'm modding. Like those are like the staples. I have them up on my secondary monitor all the time, just waiting. Definitely recommended. All right, the next thing you should be aware of is the actual GitHub for this game. Tyrone has a bunch of little nifty things here. I do sometimes pop in. You can look at the survival specific things, which is where a majority of the code is that you're going to want to look at. The API is like the core mod of the game. I never really have to look in there. It's kind of really rare. The Essentials mod, that's going to be anything for like your world edit, anything in creative, specific creative assets. You could find those in there as well. You can look to see if there are any ongoing issues with the game. I sometimes pop in here if like I'm modding and something's not working quite right. I will, look at the issues and like, oh, okay, for instance, when they added bookcases, there was a problem where bookcases were just like, you would break the block wouldn't really disappear. I'm thinking, oh my god, what's going on? Is it something in one of my mods? Nope, it was actually an issue with the game. So it's really nifty. And if you look here, VS model examples. You can kind of click on this, right, and hop in, and you can see there are examples on how you do certain things, like screen overlays, making rotatable blocks, making a test API network. Whenever you got to send packets, which, depending on the complexity of your mod, you probably will have to learn how to send packets, and we will go over that. But having all of these examples, it's fantastic. I recommend just bookmarking this, coming to it when you need it. All right, and the last thing you should be aware of is the Vintage Story Wiki. It is rare, in my opinion, that a wiki is this good for a modder. Not only does it have all the things you would think that would be in a wiki, right? Like how you play the game, all the napping recipes, blah, blah, blah. If you go further down, there is entire sections on modding the game. And it's amazing. This is where you could find pretty much everything we go over is distilled from somewhere in here. It is the information lies somewhere in here. We actually go further down. Once you click into a section of the wiki, at the very bottom, it actually lays it out even better for modding. So, for instance, let's say I'm making a block, and I want to know what kind of things I can have in the JSON file. What are the properties? I can actually come to Property Overview, click on Block, and it tells me, and it separates everything out, but it tells me, right? Main property JSON. If I'm like, well, I want variants, right? I want like every kind of metal for my metal item that I'm making. You can actually click on variant groups, and it gives you examples, like with in-game items for examples. Different things you can already kind of attach into, like for instance, if I was making a metal block or a metal item variant, right there. This automatically has all of these metals if I just call block/metal. Same thing. Further down, it gets more complex, but basically everything you need to know. And you can kind of scroll through too, right? Like climbable. Should this be climbable? Tells me it's a Boolean. Tells me it defaults to false. If I want to look at something like collision boxes, I can click on this and it gives me examples on how to do the arrays, different things I can do, like rotating them. And the best part is something like fertility. You can see that it only applies to certain blocks. So clay, gravel, sand, and soil. So this is a wonderful thing. I have this bookmarked. I suggest you do the same. All right, the next section we're going to go over here is going to be using dnSpy. This is a tool that I said was optional, but this tool is going to make things so much easier. It's going to be your encyclopedia as you're modding. Yours is not going to look like this initially. You're going to have a lot more files, or a lot more in the Assembly Explorer than I have, which is completely fine. You can delete out some of the things you don't want to see. I did. I also left a couple things, not really because it does anything, but mainly because I didn't feel like pruning everything out. But you can see here at the top, I do have specific Vintage Story assets in here, I guess you could say. What you want to do is add Vintage Story files and DLL files and EXEs directly into the Assembly Explorer. You're going to do this through a drag and drop method. First couple things that you're going to want to add to here. If you see on the left-hand side, I already have my Vintage Story folder where the game's installed. You're going to want to drag and drop over Vintage Story. You're going to drag and drop over the Vintage Story API.dll. You are also going to want to drag and drop over the Vintage Story server. And again, drag and drop right into the Assembly Explorer. Next, what you're going to want to do is open up mods, and you're going to want to drag and drop all 4 of these DLLs. So the Creative, the Essentials, the VS Mod Launcher, and the VS Survival Mod. Now, the way you use this is you could manually go in and try to find things that you want specifically. But the problem is you're not quite sure where things are, right? It gets confusing pretty quickly. So go down to search. In this mod, we're going to be doing the brazier. So all I have to do is think about, okay, well, what is the brazier similar to? It's going to be a fire pit that doesn't cook and burns fuel longer. So what can I look at? Fire pit. Type it in, automatically came up with a bunch of things. I got the block entity here. I got, the block itself here. I even got a block behavior. So in this case, we're going to go with block. So I could just double click. You could see it automatically opened the block fire pit for me. I could see all the basic code for the class file. I can see it has an interface for ignitable. I could scroll down. This is the onloaded. We'll look at something specific, right? So on entity inside, if I hover over it, it doesn't tell me anything. There are some things that you can actually hover over. I'll see if I can find something. If we do receive damage, there's a description already with it. This is something that would be in the game. So called when an entity should be receiving damage from given source. So let's break this down. On entity inside, I assume this is when the entity is inside of this particular block. So a player walking inside of this block, because fire pits you can walk through. And what is it doing? First thing, we have an if statement. It looks like it's trying to say, okay, you know what? Let's space it out so you don't get hit repeatedly, nonstop by this damage. We're going to hit you looks like it's just a random interval. And then we say, okay, well, block fire pit kind of goes hand in hand with the block fire pit, right? The block entity for this, I should say. So we're going to create a variable getting the block entity in this position of this block. And then we make sure, is the block really working, right? Is there a block entity in this position? It's got to be true. And if there is, let's make sure that it's burning fuel. If both of those things are true, then the entity that's inside, as you can see right here, we're passing entity, is going to receive damage, and that damage is going to be based on the block itself, that's the source, and it's going to be the type of fire. And it looks like it's going to do 0.5 float variable worth of HP damage to whatever's inside of it. That's pretty easy, and what I've said before, you never really want to reinvent a wheel that's already made. If I want to include fire damage, I can just copy and paste this code. I know what it does because I just read it. It's exactly what I want to do. I may have to tweak a couple things, like maybe the block entity fire pit is not what my block entity is going to be called. Maybe my block entity is going to be called block entity brazier. So I would just make that simple change. Everything else should be the same. And all of a sudden, you have fire damage when you're inside of it. I didn't have to spend half an hour trying to recreate this. So this tool is really, really powerful. What I can do also is, let's say I want to see receive damage, or better yet, fire, for a type of fire damage. I can just click on this, and I can see all the other types of damage that exist in this game. So we got your poison, we got electricity, you know, you got gravity. So I can pick and choose whatever I want. I can turn the flames blue, and I can add a frost property to it. It's whatever I want to do. We can just back out. See, and do you see how when I clicked on it, it overrode where I was in that tab. So it went from block fire pit directly to the enum damage type class file. If I wanted to, I could right click on it, and then I can just click open a new tab, and there we go. So I can keep this tab open. I'd be able to go back to my other tab for block fire pit. Everything is great. You know, and what I can also do is, let's say, receive entity damage. I want to learn more about it. Where else is this thing used? Because maybe it's too obscure for me right here. I don't understand how it's trying to utilize it. I can right click on it and I can analyze it. This is so awesome that you can do this. Because now what I can do is I see, okay, it belongs in the entity class. It's called receive damage. This is where the method originally is located. And then now I can see, like, what's overriding it. Well, it looks like entity agents overriding it. Entity locusts are overriding it as well. I can see other things that uses it. So we got entity agent receive damage. And if you look, like, entity agent on interact, if I want to navigate to any of this, I can just double click, and then look, it pulled it right up to entity agent. This is what it's referring to. Really, really powerful tool. So I encourage you to get used to this, navigate it, think about what you want your mod to be. Think about what gets you closest there, look it up here, and see exactly how the class files are. Trust me, you will not be disappointed. All right, everyone. What we're going to do next is, well, we're going to start to kind of set everything up. What you want to do first is you're going to want to open up the VS Mod template. You're going to copy all this. Now, if you have GitHub set up and you have the GitHub desktop, see, for me, it puts it right into my documents. I'm not going to put this on GitHub. I don't know. I may. We'll see. But basically, you know, you'll find whatever folder you want. We're going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this, you know what? It's not going to be tutorial mod. We are going to do awesome tutorial mod. And that fingered again, right? Tutorial mod. Boom. There we go. Open it up, drag and drop everything in. There we go. First thing you want to do is click on the VS Mod tools. Going to open up, well, first Windows is going to try and protect you from Mino Tyrone. Run anyways. All right. First thing you want to do is type in setup. This is going to set up, you could see we actually created some things in here, just shifted. We created a couple files and make sure that the game is detected. If you install the game in the default folder, you don't have to worry about this. Vintage Story is up to date. We are good to go. What we are going to be creating, and what I'm going to show you, how to set up, is going to be a compiled mod. A compiled mod gets the best of both worlds, right? There are some mods that are just asset mods, so they're your JSON files. There are some mods that are just DLL files, which is going to be your code, right? Your CS files. What a compiled mod is, it's the both worlds put together. You will use JSON files for like your assets and whatnot, and you will also pair them with class files to do very specific things with whatever it is you're creating. I think it's by far the best. I think it's easy to set up, but we are going to be focusing on compiled mods. To do this, it's going to be really easy. Just type in add. You're going to put your mod ID in. Now, a mod ID should be all lowercase, no spaces. I think maybe you could put dashes. I would say no dashes. That's just kind of like the standard for everyone. Don't use abbreviations. This is supposed to be like a unique ID. For me, it's ViesCraft machines. Before you make a mod that's like a Better Crates, you know, for instance, there's already a mod out there called Better Crates, and your mod's going to come in conflict with them. So just do a quick mod check on the mod database, see what mods are out there. Try and just type in the name of the mod that you want, you know, that you're thinking of doing. Maybe create the profile to make sure there are no duplicates. If you can create the project on the mod website, you're good to go. It's probably free and you can use that as your mod ID. I am not going to publish this, so I'm going to say awesome mod, right? This is what it could be, or better yet, why don't I try and be more realistic? And then compiled. You'll see it does a couple things. It told me that appears to be a valid mod ID. Surprise, surprise, all lowercase, crammed together. It creates everything for me, injected it in my solution, good to go. Those two statements did most of the heavy lifting for us. So we can close this out now. The only other thing you will ever need to get to is this vsmods.sln. This, you double click it, it opens up Visual Studio Community, and you can see right here in the side on your Solution Explorer, we have our Brazier mod. If you expand it, there's not really a lot going on yet. That's just how it is. We need to set up a couple of things before we try and start the game or do anything. First thing we're going to want to do to get the game kind of set up, make sure our environment is set up correctly. You're going to right click on the VS Mod Launcher. You're going to go to Build Dependencies, Project Dependencies. We are going to uncheck the Brazier mod. And I will explain this in a moment. Right here, Brazier mod, we're going to go to the same place, Build Dependencies, Project Dependencies. And now we are going to check the box here. So what is this doing? Our mod is going to depend on this VS Mod Launcher, which is actually just a route point for the game itself, right? If the game isn't running, our mod should not run because we use game assets. That's asking for failure. So by doing this, we are making sure the order is the way we want it to be. What we also need to do is right-click, go down to Properties, make sure for your mod, the .NET framework is indeed 4.6.1. It may default to some other framework. Make sure it is 4.6.1. When you're done, close it out. Save it if you need to, then close it out. Right-click here, go under Properties for the VS Mod Launcher. For this one, default namespace should be VS Mods. That's fine. Make sure it's class library. It should all be by default. Make sure 4.6.1 is selected. In debug, if you know what you're doing, you could change things here. Basically, when you start the game in this environment, it's going to look for a world called mod samples test. If the mod samples test world does not exist, it will create a super flat world, name it that, and it's the default that it kind of pushes you into this default world every time you start it. You could, at that point, you could log out, right? You can shut down the world, go back to the main menu, and then load up any world you want. But if you know how to deal with the variables, you could change it here. If not, just leave it alone. That's all you have to do. Make sure if you changed anything, save it, right? By clicking your little save up here. Close it out. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go to References. You could see here that some things should be familiar. Vintage Story API, and then we have our creative mode, survival mode, and the essentials, the 3 mods from the dnSpy should be familiar to you. We want to add more references, so right-click on References, click Add Reference. We are going to browse, and if you see here, you want to go to your roaming Vintage Story library, right? If you're going to use Harmony, you want to add Harmony. Whatever you're going to be using, like the protobuf-net is something that you would use for like packets. What I would suggest you add right off the bat here is carosharp.dll. This is used in any dialogue, or the game calls them dialogues. You would know them as GUIs, graphic user interfaces. This is the text font pretty much that's used. So make sure it's checked, click OK. It adds it right there. Now we can make calls to font when we get to that point. I would suggest you just do it now. All right. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to create a series of folders here, and we're going to create a couple class files, and then we'll call it from there. What you should do before we do that is make sure you build everything. So I can just right click, click build. It should say successful. We got to test this. Just click start. It's going to launch the game. It's going to create that super flat world for the first time. You see, we got an issue with our mod, which is totally fine. You want to make sure that the game at least starts like this. It will go through. Once you got this far, you're good to go. You'll see it will load into my test world. I just recently deleted it, but I was working on things. You know, you can see some of my mod items here, open and close windows, a couple beds to jump on, an explosion over there. You know, so, you know, this is the kind of world it makes. Nice, super flat. You know, I'm able to access any of the mods here. Like you see, I have primitive survival. I was doing tests with that, making sure the lanterns work for like my machines mod. You know, so there are some things here, right? You know, like this is how the world is. In the world, what you may want to do is take this opportunity to go to settings, go to interface, make sure you click developer mode, select that, go to debug. I usually default with these first four. Make sure they're all checked. If you want, just check everything. When you start the game, you will see right here, this is pretty much all the important stuff. Like every time you open up the inventory, print statements for everything. This is actually what our error was before that you saw. It's a code mod, but it doesn't find anything. Yeah, we haven't made a mod system yet for it. So that's the error. So we're going to move that, go back, make sure you select everything, back out. Once you're done, you could just save and leave the world. There we go, and we can shut down the game. It loaded successfully, great. If not, I mean, just Google search any error codes you get. If you followed my directions to this point, you should be fine. Just make sure that, you know, things are installed in the default path, you know, cross your T's, dot your I's. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to create a bunch of folders and subfolders. And then after that, I'll explain what I did, show you, and we will start creating our first class files. All right. As you can see, we have more folders. Again, we made a compiled mod, so it's the best of both worlds. It's your assets mod, and then your DLL, your source files, right? Both of these come together, and you can create some pretty powerful things. So what you do is, in assets, make sure you make a folder. It's going to have to be exactly what your mod ID is. So in this case, Brazier mod. And I just created a bunch of empty folders for now. We will eventually have to make blocks, so I put in block types. We'll make items eventually, so we'll have item types. The lang is for your languages. You're going to have a JSON file in there for localization. We will go over recipes. Shapes are going to be your models. Sounds would be any external sounds you want to add into the game. Textures are, of course, textures that go over your shapes. For the source, this is how I set it up. If you want to do something different, feel free to. But I always break things up into three main subfolders. You have your client. These are going to be CS files, class files that should only be seen by the client side, right? A game like this, you have your server side and you have your client side. Things that are definitely client side are going to be your dialog boxes or your GUIs. Those are specifically seen by the client. Something like a shape renderer. that's going to be in this client folder as well. There's not going to be much that goes in here, but it's nice to have that separation. Your common folder. This is going to be where a majority of your stuff ends up. If you make anything special for items, blocks, block behaviors, entities, entity behaviors, subsystems, whatever you pick will probably end up in common. For me, I also have a system folder. System is going to primarily hold commands or packets. You know, if you have to send any packets through the network. We will go over this as well. This will be part of the tutorial. Normally, I will also put in something like, for instance, in my ViesBlocks mod, I have beds. Those beds rely on their own registered sleep system. That sleep system goes in the system folder. Again, it's how I feel comfortable separating things out. Okay, open up the mod info by double-clicking it. You see it already kind of adjusts a couple things. Your mod ID is auto-filled. The name, this is going to be the human readable name. So for mine, it's going to be Brazier Mod. You know, I'm going to put the space in, make it good. I can put in awesome if I want. Awesome Brazier Mod. This is just the human readable string. For this, authors, for me, it's going to be Vice. If you want to put more than one person in here, if you're working with other people, you just put a comma, right? Because it's an array. For me, I'm going to put my cat Bingley in here. So Bingley and I are going to be making this Brazier mod. Really, it's going to be me, but you know, I'm going to have Bingley in here. He is a cat of many, many faces. He is Sir Bingley Esquire the Third. So he is going to get credit for this. Description to be added. I mean, this is something that you would add in, right? I can say, this mod adds Braziers to VS. For the version, I always kind of reverse it here. I don't start at a 1.0 because there's so much work to be done. I start at 0.0.1. Dependencies, you would use this for if your mod only works at a certain version. Like, oh, this is only going to be for 1.18.3, so 1.18.3 plus, I would put it in the game. If I had another mod I was hooking into, like Eldritch Monsters, ViesCraft Machines, I could, you know, put a comma, right? I could add whatever it is that I wanted here. It's something, if you know how to use it, use it. If you don't, just skip it for now. Once you're done, save. I always do save all. I normally have multiple windows open. I want to make sure every one of my changes are saved. And you can close that out. Next thing we're going to work on, we are going to create two class files. So you're going to right click on source. You're going to add a new item. It automatically defaults to the class right here, the class type. Do not have numbers in your class files. You can name these anything you want. Do not have numbers in them. It's just one of those unwritten rules. But what we're going to want to do is we're going to create two class files. The first one is going to be your main ModSystem file. The second thing is going to be a references file. So I'm going to make the ModSystem first, and I'm going to do it. It's called, my mod's called Brazier Mod, right? So BRAZIER, capital MOD, no spaces. You can have, you know, like capitals just like that. We're going to add it. There you go. It's right in the root. I'm not putting this into anything specific here. You can if you want. I like to have it right in the source, right in the root. Next thing we're going to do is add new item. Again, defaults to class. I'm going to get rid of the name. For this, I personally don't like to put just references. There is something called references already. It's going to be more annoying when you're trying to call something from this particular file because C#, there's usually a reference class file anyway. So I like to put the mod abbreviation in front. In this case, it's the Brazier mod, so BM references. Nice and simple. For ViesCraft Machines, it's VCM references. Here, click add. One thing you will notice right off the bat is it starts everything off internal. We don't want internal at all. Change it to public. I'm going to create a bunch of white space. We're going to change that internal to public as well. I like white space. I can always subtract white space. Why would you not create a bunch of scratch space when you're writing code? In references, this is where I suggest you make notes for your mod. You can copy all of this too. Pause here if you need to. So these are some tools, like shortcuts while you're in the game, that you can type into chat that can help immensely. We already did the one thing, go into settings, enable a couple things. I usually like to enable everything. You can put in .debug wireframe entity. It shows hitboxes. If you put this in, with the 1 at the end, it's going to show debug attributes on entities. For this to go away, you'll have to change this to a 0 to turn that off. If you exit out of the game, it will stay on, it saves. So 0 turns it off, 1 turns it on. You could do /entity debug 1, shows AI tasks. You can spawn a player bot if you want, maybe for, if you're recording footage or whatever. These two things right here are very important. .tfedit allows you to change properties in game of an item that you're holding. .bsedit is the other one. That's going to be your block selection and collisions. You can modify those in game. We will go over this when we make those items, but just know they exist. So I will have that, and then normally I comment out a nice little section. This right here is going to be what I have for notes. So this is going to be a brazier. What do I want it to do? Consume firewood, warms, space around it. I can say very fuel efficient. I'm going to have to create an item part for brazier. I want it to be smithable, right? You get it through smithing, doing metal forging. Block should have particles and sounds. All this stuff, I'm going to cut it all out. I actually like to put it outside of the main public class for my references. It's just a me thing. You can always just delete extra space if you don't like it. Do whatever makes you comfy. But this is kind of the way I do things. If you ever watch me live stream, you see I have all this stuff there. I use it, again, this is my reference guide. I don't want to sit there and memorize a bunch of things or have sticky notes. Like, this is my sticky note. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to create 3 different constant strings. And I will come back when they're done. All right, and we're back. So, public constant strings. I like to have these in here. I like to have a mod ID. This mod ID is exactly what you have over here. It's what the project is called, Brazier mod. Then I have a mod ID with the colon, right? So really it's just my mod ID plus a colon. It's equivalent to doing this, or to doing this. That's all it's doing. And then I have the game ID with colon. Any kind of game asset, like if you want to make, if you want to use a sound, an anvil dropping sound, that's an in-game asset. To get the asset location, you have to put game colon. I mistype things all the time. You see it constantly. If you watch me live stream, you'll see it through these tutorials. I fat finger all the time. My fingers have a mind of their own. They just do things, and it gets close enough most times. Having constants takes that guesswork out, because if you accidentally put something like that, an extra E, you are going to run into issues after issues after issues, and you have no idea exactly what is causing the issue. Use a constant. Change it one place, it propagates everywhere else. Highly, highly recommend it. Again, you do you. I suggest you do this. All right, we're going to save, and we are going to go over to the other CS file. For this, I'm going to copy and paste a couple things over. The first thing is going to be right here. I'm going to put a colon, and we're going to do ModSystem. You need to extend this. This is our handshake into the Vintage Story game to register all the magic we're about to do. That being said, first thing we are going to want to put in is this override method. Basically, start again, you can hover over it. It tells you what it does. This is where you're going to put any item class files you make. any block class files you make, any block entity class files you make, anything special. If you want to make something mountable, this is your hook into the registration. We will be using this in the other mod videos that we make. Next thing you're going to want to copy in is an override bool for should load. Again, hover over it. This is a simple on-off switch. Should your mod be loaded? Sometimes you may want to actually set this to false. If you do, it's basically like removing the mod from your mods folder. This is all you want to put in right now. You know, the foundation is made. So if we save this, we want to come back up to the top, right? You can right click on Brazier mod, build, make sure it's successful. I will show you. So if you do happen to fat finger something, I put an extra A right there. Not only does it tell me, right, if I'm over here and I'm like, oh, let me save everything and let me build, it's going to fail right there. One failure. And it automatically goes to your error list. And then you're like, huh, I could double click on it. Bam, brought me right there. Yep, look at that. It's an error. Whoops, mistyped it. So, and that's why we made constants before. Because if I fat finger while I'm typing in the constant, it will error out and it will tell me like, whoops, you typed it in wrong. If I just had a blank string in there, it would never tell me that there's anything wrong. Just make sure, you know, you understand how to do things. So we built it, build successful. Let's run the game. We should not get an error anymore. We have an empty mod just waiting to go. You know, you can see here that I have the carry on mod right now. It's pulling all the mods from my mod folder. If you run into any weirdness while you're modding, just clear out your mod folder for the game. Start up the game, go to mods, you know how to remove mods. Just get rid of all of them. And there we go. We're back in. There were no errors. Everything came up clean. We are good to go. I can safely shut this down. One thing to note here is that you will see your mod, Awesome Brazier mod. Got this information from the mod info file that we modified before. You could see that Awesome Brazier mod there. It's a code mod. Vice and Bingley make it. This mod adds braziers to Vintage Story. If you want to add a picture, you can. We will eventually be doing that as well. But yeah, congratulations. You have a basic compiled mod, a code mod set up and ready to go. All right, everyone, that's going to wrap it out for me. In the next video, I'm not sure if I'm going to have to break it out into 1, 2, possibly 3 videos. We're going to go over item creation. That's going to be creating an item through the asset way JSON. We're going to attach a class file to it. We're going to do some localization. I'm going to try and go over certain properties, item properties, and hopefully it's going to be helpful. I hope you enjoyed this video. And again, as a quick reminder, make sure you go down to the comments and follow all the links to get everything you need for setup. And I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.